Have you recently been in an accident and need some legal advice? Have you noticed that around the holidays, accidents tend to happen more often? If that happens to you or has happened to you recently, you might want to find a lawyer to help you tackle all of the guesswork when it comes to personal injury compensation. In fact, a recent study suggests that personal injury claims may earn up to $24,000 in compensation. What if I told you that this can be easy? If you head on over to accident.com/podcast and your state is in the growing coverage list, you'll see a network of personal injury lawyers throughout the U.S. who will say what cases they specialize in. You'll then fill out a quick, maybe 1 or 2 minute form, and if your claim is accepted, the closest attorney to you will reach out to you to schedule a free consultation. Filling out a form is easy, so head on over to accident.com/podcast. and find out what your claim is worth.
A nefarious nightmare contains themes that may be explicit or triggering for some. Specific warnings and disclaimers will be mentioned in the show notes. A nefarious nightmare assumes all parties that are mentioned in these cases to be innocent unless proven guilty in a court of law. Listener discretion is strongly advised. You can help us grow the show by leaving us a 5-star written review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or you can join our Patreon for lighthearted bonus content. With this, welcome to Season 6.
Prisma Reyes vanished into thin air on April 17, 2019. Prisma was last seen in downtown Dallas walking into Olympus at Ross Apartment Complex, now named Macallan at Ross, around 6 p.m. Her white Jeep seen abandoned nearby. She was witnessed on CCTV footage pacing back and forth on her cell phone and making phone calls. Close by her ex-boyfriend Ryan's apartment near the elevator, just over 3 hours after having lunch with him.
She was reported missing after she failed to pick up her son from her babysitter that evening. Something Prisma would never do is abandon her only child. The chilling thing about this is that it appears there was nothing off about the day that she went missing. At least that's what we thought until we dove in. Is there a red herring within this episode? Any clues that point to what happened to Prisma, or where she is, or what happened? We will explore it all, as well as statistics on missing persons and why this case is an example of why we need to pay way more attention and diligence to missing minorities. With this, I'm Courtney Fenner.
And I'm Amanda Cronin, and A Nefarious Nightmare presents Dark Side of the Moon. Find Prisma Reyes.
So at this point, you're probably all wondering why we chose to title this a Pink Floyd reference. And I promise we're going to get to it. But also, I just thought about something. Ever since I was a little girl, I thought this way about the Dallas skyline. And when you look at the Dallas skyline, you'll notice the big ball, which is the Reunion Tower. And to me, it's always kind of looked like a moon. Just a decorative moon. I just thought that was something pretty cool, considering that we also see in Prisma's name something related to said Pink Floyd reference, Dark Side of the Moon. But anyway, I wanted to start by saying that, and also saying that this case has personally bothered me since spring of 2019. I remember I was off of work that day, and my daughter had just turned 1, just a few months prior. I just started working at Ministry Safe that January. My first day was actually my birthday, and oh, that reminds me. By the way, if y'all are looking to give gifts for my 41st, utility bills are always a fun gift. And I'm only halfway kidding, but anyway, I remember the day I had watched the news about it. Here in DFW, it's WFAA, but a lot of us locals know it as Channel 8, Channel 8 News. And it was fairly bright and sunny that afternoon. My daughter was doing this really adorable thing where she thought it was fun to try to snack on the little metal siding on our coffee table at the time. And she looked at me with these little bright, happy eyes, like she was just so proud of herself. And I might have chuckled or took a video, and then I look at the TV and see Prisma's face. I thought to myself, she looks super familiar. As the day went on to talk about the details, they mentioned a city I'm familiar with, Mesquite, where I used to hang out with friends back when I was doing music. I want to say I remembered them talking about the Lake Highlands area, which also struck a chord with me, being that I went to Lake Highlands and I thought of her all day, just that day, trying to place how I might have known her. And I still think of her today. I'm still in shock how it's been 4 years and barely any answers. We've been wanting to cover Prisma's case for quite some time, but back in, I believe, 2022, we covered the case of Robert Durst in its place. And the reason being is that another person had been wanting to cover Prisma and we just didn't want to intervene. And we were still very new, but now we know that the family definitely wants more people covering the case and, like everyone else, wants answers.
Today, we're going to finish our little accidental Texas tour by heading all the way back to downtown Dallas from Abilene, which is where we saw Paris Lee Bennett last week. Dallas sits 2.5 hours east of Abilene and is, like much of Texas, rich in history. We have talked about Dallas plenty of times in the past, and you'd have to live under a rock not to know anything about Dallas anyways. But what we will tell you is that Dallas in general is rich, both with old money and, well, history. The case we cover today is located in downtown Dallas, which is a major tourist attraction, at least in our heads, but also a magnet for violent crime, sex work, you name it. Think tiny New York City. We talked about Deep Ellum previously, and today's case is located in the center between Deep Ellum and Oak Lawn, which the latter is known for its welcoming community of our LGBTQ+ friends and also hosts pride parades. Originally, we did have a short blurb about Prisma's case back in May 2022. This was back when we did missing persons segments for our episodes, and the episode is in Season 2, Episode 7, titled, It Was Her or Me, the infamous Robert Durst. It wasn't one of our best episodes, as this all occurred before Minding the Beehive series, but still worth checking out. But we will dive deeper on Prisma and some very important statistics in this episode. You'll hear several case similarities, and even though each case is unique, it's still odd to us. Eliza Lamb, Gabby Petito, Vanessa Gillen, and Tamala Horsford, to name a few.
Y'all, we did a ton of research on this case and came across so many articles, and according to one of the articles, which was posted in September of 2021 by Business Insider, there's been a silent epidemic of missing Black and Latina women since the beginning of the COVID pandemic. The exact number isn't known because data is incomplete and media coverage is very sparse. From Business Insider, co-founder and chief operating officer of BAMFI, or Black and Missing Foundation Incorporated, states that the numbers are spiking with 30% at the start of the foundation, growing to 40% a year later. It was also stated that the number of missing Latina women and girls are more difficult to come by because there doesn't seem to be any organization that's focused on missing Latinx people, that Latinas are counted alongside white women and girls, which researchers claim is a problem within the scope of the pandemic and how it affected and still affects these communities even today. And it goes into it a little further, saying, quote, that same data set found 46,056 white women and 112,879 white children, including Latinas, went missing in 2020, the most recent year for which data is available, end quote.
Why this is a problem is because we have all heard the term, quote-unquote, missing white woman syndrome, or are at least familiar with it due to a rise in that term since the case of Gabby Petito. The best definition we can give you is basically stated by author and academic Charlton McLuhan, who said that missing white woman syndrome is basically white women occupying a privileged role as a violent crimes victims in media reporting. In short, and in case of some of you that aren't aware or don't remember, Gabby Petito went missing in September of 2021, and due to heightened media coverage, her remains were found, and evidence pointed to Brian Laundrie, her on and off again boyfriend, as her killer. Fortunately for her family, they get some closure, knowing who their daughter's killer was. But even if they have agreed that there is a massive lack of coverage on cases regarding POC and missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls.
Now, when you do a Google search of missing persons, It's a little bit more promising in the eyes of investigating those that are in the Latinx community, but even still in 2023, which it's almost 2024, the very first photo is that of a white person. Fortunately, or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, you do see others in there. But my question is, why is it that the very first photo is almost always a white person? They deserve coverage, don't get me wrong, but so does everybody else. Why isn't more attention being paid to all missing persons? Why does it take a full page to see a missing Latina? When the case of Gabby Petito occurred, it started out as a typical missing persons report. The same exact kind of missing persons report given by families across the world, no matter what race they are or privilege that they carry. So, while cases like Prisma Reyes is gaining a little traction, why is it that it's taken this long, being that she went missing in 2019, for the media to recognize and bring the light to her case? But with those like Gabby Petito, only took a few months. And the thing is, Prisma's isn't a case where the criminal justice system is failing her, but the media and the general public are.
In what seems to be a response to the Business Insider article we read about a few minutes ago, the epidemic of missing Latinx women and girls in October of 2021, the headline from the Greyhound News plainly stated, quote, "There is an epidemic of missing Hispanic and Latinx women," end quote. Confirming this thought, and within the article shows a photo of Vanessa Gilhun, a 20-year-old U.S. Army soldier who went missing around 1 p.m. on April 22nd, 2020. What caught our eye particularly was that when we saw the photo, we first thought that it might have been Prisma, because she too has a military background and is indeed Latina. In fact, when Courtney spoke to Dan Fuchs, Prisma's stepdad, he even said the same thing and noted plenty more missing persons with the same or similar demographics just in Texas. Vanessa was stationed in what was known then as Fort Hood, which is located just 12 minutes north of Killeen, Texas. There are many coincidences regarding Vanessa and Prisma, both located in Texas, both with military backgrounds, both Latina, and both went missing around the same time of year. The issue is that even though Prisma went missing about exactly a year prior to Vanessa, all of this only highlights the epidemic that we are speaking about, as it is all just too coincidental. Unfortunately, the case for Vanessa was that hers ended up in murder, where she was missing for about 2 months before her remains were found buried along the Leon River. She had been bludgeoned to death with a hammer by another soldier who, once he was discovered, fled and unalived himself. That's a case we will certainly have to cover at some point in the future.
When searching through highly reported missing persons cases and noticing that, fortunately, there is indeed growing traction with the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls community, as well as more Latinas, but we came across a section that said, things to know. It went on to say that 25% of missing persons are never found. This could be that the person simply does not want to be found and wanted to start a new life, as stated earlier in our episode about Samantha Tapp. In some, and possibly many cases, missing persons can be victims of sex trafficking, which does involve a change in complete identity in some cases, or, in a darker twist, the person who is missing was murdered and their body well disposed of. With every missing persons case that we cover, we always assume that the person in question is still alive and treat them as such unless and until something comes to light that the latter is true. We also want to recognize the fact that we have indeed noticed people complain about media covering these cases because, and we absolutely, let me just put that out there, we do not agree with these kind of comments, but the comments are something like, quote, "This kind of thing is boring." Let's remind you that this is far from boring to the families. Further, true crime consumers really should just work on the language they use in general, just as those of us doing any kind of true crime content should. Instead of the word boring, how about use things like, "These cases are a challenge in my head and I prefer listening to solve cases for that reason." But I digress.
This kind of case is traumatizing, infuriating, frustrating, heartbreaking, and scary to those families and friends. We need to wake up, put an open mind and heart into these cases because, quite frankly, what if? What if you know some of these missing people? Or even worse, what would you think of those kinds of comments if you were found in the position where a loved one had gone missing? How would you feel? Would you want to read those kinds of comments, or would you want people to try to help you? Newsflash, we aren't here to entertain. We are here to advocate, support, and offer insight and information. So with this, Prisma Denise Peralta Reyes entered this world on March 20th, 1993 in Veracruz, Mexico to her mother, Lilia Peralta. Shortly after Prisma was born, her birth father passed away, and there is unfortunately not much information out there on him. But according to Dan Fuchs, who we were fortunate enough to speak with, the story behind the death of Prisma's father is alleged to be tragic. He worked for a panaderia, and one day during a bread delivery, he had been driving on a narrow road when another vehicle had sideswiped him, throwing him over a cliff.
Prisma lived with her grandmother in Mexico at first, while her siblings and her mother lived in a separate location. All had started out in extreme poverty. Her mother worked different jobs to support her family, which included Prisma, her brothers Rudy, Angel, and Alex, and Prisma's sister Esmeralda. Around the time Prisma was 3 or 4, her mother was having lunch with a friend in Juarez, Mexico. She and her friend came across Dan Fuchs, who you will hear a lot from, and the three of them had engaged in conversation. Dan ended up buying their lunch for them, and Lilia and Dan hit it off from there. They began dating, but neither of them knew the other's spoken language, so how they got to know each other and how they were dating was they spent time using a translation dictionary to communicate with each other. Soon, Dan and Lilia got married, and Dan worked to help get Lilia, Prisma, and the rest of their family to the U.S.
According to Dan, he didn't know Prisma at all. He only knew of her until between the ages of 10 or 11, as he recalled when she moved to the U.S. He recalls of the school trying to hold Prisma back a year on the argument that Mexico's education is far different from the U.S. And he talks about how he fought them on this. He had won that argument, and Prisma actually ended up getting invited to attend a magnet school for talented kids. This school was for the gifted and would be versed in the arts, math, science, and medical sciences. Very challenging subjects like that. This further drives home the fact that Prisma was intelligent and, as we find out, a total spitfire.
Dan Fuchs filled that emptiness left by her late father and became Prisma's stepfather, and the two ended up being very close. As of today, Dan remains one of her biggest advocates, and because her birth father passed when she was so young, he stepped in and filled that role. Dan is pretty much the only dad Prisma has ever known, and even though he and Prisma's family barely talk these days, he's worked alongside a retired private investigator and spent all of his free time trying to find his missing daughter, even dipping into his own pocket to secure billboards and even come up with reward money. After a few years of Lilia and Dan being married, the family moved to Mesquite, Texas, a suburban city just outside of North Dallas near Garland, which, fun fact, some parts of the 2009 horror comedy Zombieland was filmed in Garland, and then after that, the family moved to Mesquite. Prisma then became a U.S. citizen.
Let's have a sidebar and talk a little bit about the name Prisma. When we looked up the translation for Prisma, what we noted is the immediate one given, prism, which, when you think about it, is beautiful. And please remember that very thought. When Prisma was born, she very obviously refracted love and light to her family, much in the same way as a prism would. After all, if you look at the word prism, it is considered as a way of looking at or thinking about something that causes you to see or understand it in a different way, which is what we're trying to do with this episode. Imagine you're holding a crystal or glass pyramid or even the cover of Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon. Remember we mentioned that earlier? Here's the explanation behind our title. When white light is passed through that of a pyramid, it creates a prism. As it splits into its spectrum of colors, and this process of white light splitting into its constituent colors is dispersion. What we aim to do, much like her namesake, is aim to look at all of this in a different way and hope that this episode can work much like a prism would and shine some literal light onto the truth. When we spoke to Dan about this thought, he closed this out with a soliloquy. Prisma's name literally translates to beautiful. As a friend of his had a sister named Prisma, he said it's a fairly rare name and spoke of the interpretation of its literal meaning of beautiful.
According to Dan, Prisma did not know a lick of English at first, but after just one summer, she became fluent. Everything we have read and heard about Prisma suggests that she was and is bright and intelligent and even ahead of her time and her age. In fact, growing up, Prisma was described as outgoing, straightforward, and determined. According to Dan Fuchs, when speaking with Unsolved Mysteries, quote, Prisma was a very, very independent young lady. She didn't like taking flack from really anybody. She was outspoken. If she had it on her mind, she'd tell you what she thought. End quote. It's also been noted that she excelled in her grades at school and she graduated from Kemp High School a year early. She then went on to Kaplan College to be a paralegal. At one point, she joined the National Guard and achieved a private first-class rank. When she was in college, she fell pregnant by Arturo Garza Jr., who was her boyfriend at the time. When Prisma was around 6 months pregnant, she and Arturo engaged in an argument which resulted in her and her unborn child being kicked out of the apartment. There have been claims against Arturo, which he disputes, of him disappearing completely after that. According to Dan, there were issues at first with Arturo, but that he's grown into a responsible man as far as he's concerned.
She gave birth to a baby boy named Dominic in 2013. And y'all, Dominic was Prisma's absolute world. There's simply no feeling in the world like that of becoming a parent, especially a mother. The love and joy felt is unmatched and also difficult to comprehend. I mean, if you're a parent of any sort, whether it's to children or pets, or even if you are someone with hopes to be one day, you'd understand this. Dominic was Prisma's pure joy, her light, her everything. She always made sure Dominic was fed, bathed, clothed, happy, and well cared for. She was the epitome of perfection as a mom. She would dote on her son and just be the best mom to him. There was rarely, if ever, a time that she would be late picking her only child up from anywhere. He never went without.
In 2016, when Dominic was around 3 years old, Prisma met Ryan at a place called E-Bar Tex-Mex, which is located in downtown Dallas, pretty much smack dab in the middle of Oak Lawn and Deep Ellum on North Haskell Avenue. Ryan was much older than she was, around 9 or 10 years older, according to Dan. And we have to throw that in there to somewhat understand the relationship dynamic. So when she was 25, he was around 34 or 35. Throughout Prisma and Ryan's on and off again relationship, there had been a few domestic violence calls placed to the police, noting one in particular at the same year just shortly after they first met. During one of the incidents, Ryan was charged with assault after she had been seen with bruises all over her, but he ended up receiving a lesser charge, and then he and Prisma separated and went their own way. Prisma and Ryan were seeing other people, but then began talking again in February of 2019. It's been noted that they wanted to work things out and try again, and then they started dating.
While she had goals and dreams of being a paralegal, she ended up quitting her job and opted into taking a job at a car dealership called Texas 123 Auto as a receptionist. One point, according to Dan, Prisma had a breast augmentation because she took on a secondary job as an exotic dancer. This is important to note because when she worked as a paralegal, it was under an attorney that believed to have an attraction to her. But there were claims that the attorney she worked for made several of the women who worked for him uncomfortable and would engage in inappropriate comments from time to time. Some claim that the attorney had a specific type and that Prisma, as well as all of his employees, were definitely his type.
Now, that attorney did offer to do a pro bono case for Prisma regarding a custody hearing for her son Dominic. To fast forward a little bit, the claims that Prisma's family made were that Arturo left and never returned and never gave any of his time and attention to Dominic. Arturo disagreed, as he claims he paid almost $60,000 in child support over the years. Dan recalled the judge in the pro bono custody hearing thinking it was really odd, wondering why the attorney was even offering a pro bono case to Prisma in particular.
A month after that, in March, was when Prisma landed the new job at Texas 123 Auto in Mesquite. Prisma then purchased a handgun and mentioned to loved ones that she was concerned someone was following or stalking her, as the tires on her 2017 white Jeep Wrangler very recently had been slashed. Just over 2 months prior to this incident, New Year's Eve of 2018, a domestic violence call was made and Ryan had been charged with either assault or domestic battery. Prisma had been seen with bruises all over her body. When talking to Dan about the assault case with Ryan, he claims that Ryan had gotten upset at Prisma because she evidently caused him to lose some kind of either business or mortgage license, and that resulted in an assault. Ryan had been charged for assault, but Prisma dropped the case. Dan and myself believed that it was because there may have been an underlying threat to Prisma. It's believed that Ryan might have gotten jealous that may have had something to do with the fact that she quit that job.
So it's April 17th, 2019, a month after the tire slashing incident. Prisma arrived early at her job at Texas 123 Auto. She found an empty spot and parked there. During her shift, she and another coworker had gotten into a verbal altercation with the coworker accusing Prisma of stealing her parking spot. Prisma talked to her managers about this incident and then just went on about her day. At around noon, she left and went to E-Bar Tex-Mex to meet with Ryan for lunch. She and Ryan got into a fight and he left, leaving Prisma at the restaurant, who continued to order her drinks. She ended up staying until about 3:30 in the afternoon, when the bartender had cut her off from ordering more drinks and asked her to leave. This had reportedly made Prisma very upset. Detective Dustin Barrett, who y'all will hear a lot more about, he worked for the Mesquite Police Department at the time. He was interviewed by WFAA 3 years after the incident, and when talking about the initial altercation, he says, quote, "We have them on camera during that. He leaves and she goes back inside the E-Bar," end quote.
Prisma got into her Jeep, and according to phone records that were tracked, she first started heading back to her job in Mesquite, but then turned around to head back to Dallas after a road rage incident which resulted in her pulling her gun out on the opposing driver. The phone records noted that she either received or made a call on her phone and then headed back to Dallas towards Ryan's apartment, which is the Olympus at Ross, located 3 minutes south of E-Bar. She parked on the street, ran inside the parking garage, where she hung around the elevator for several minutes looking irritated and upset. Some note that she had looked drunk, but remembered what Dan had said. She could handle her liquor. There's no way she was drunk.
So, before we continue, I want to make a note of something. We watched the footage of Prisma at the elevator, and the vibe is definitely a spooky one. While the two are different scenarios and situations, the video was reminiscent of the one of Elisa Lam, who, if y'all don't know, is a Canadian tourist who was the subject of the infamous Cecil Hotel incident and was found deceased February 1st of 2013. Of course, we seriously hope that the case with Prisma doesn't end up in the same tone, but our gut feeling was not right watching that video. If you decide to deep dive on your own after this episode, we'll include links in our episode notes, of course, but the footage of Prisma will be located there too, and we strongly encourage you to view it. You will then see why so many people are interested in that video alone, and you just might get that same feeling that we did too.
One video shows Prisma arriving at the Olympus on Ross apartments, now called Macallan on Ross. During an interview with WFAA, Detective Barrett goes on to say, quote, "So she runs through the gate and then goes to stand by the elevator. We spoke to everyone on her phone records list. that she called leading up to her disappearance, and all of them told us that she sounds upset. End quote. Throughout the video, Prisma can be seen pacing in front of an elevator, talking on her phone for several minutes. One phone call made, seen in the video, was to a friend named Chris, a friend of her family who was out of town on business at the time. He had said that she kept calling him Ryan, sounding very upset, and kept demanding his apartment number. Alternatively, she seemed to be disoriented and in need of help. This is one of the things that Dan told us was just really not like her.
Detective Barrett had told WFAA that witnesses said that she appeared to be drunk and crying. She called several people, friends and family, expressing that she was upset about something. While he didn't go into specifics, he did say that they were aware of what that something was, and that was about all there was to that. When speaking with Dan about this, he said to us, quote, "I remember it was a silver or gray sedan that she was seen by a resident. The trunk was open and Prisma was hunched over it and crying. The resident saw her there. The police said nothing about this, and the lady asked her if she was okay or if that was her car. I've seen Prisma drink and she can handle her liquor, but she did get cut off at the bar. The brandishment of the firearm, she brought it for personal protection, and she felt that she was being followed. Bits and pieces are just coming back. It's filed away in the back of my head, but it's all there. Her gun was under the front seat." End quote.
According to Detective Barrett, some witnesses told police that she was seen walking on both floors of the building's parking garage. They also say they saw Prisma exit the elevator on either the 4th or 5th floor. However, there's no physical evidence of Prisma actually being inside the building, with neither her purse nor her cell phone ever found. The only physical evidence is what was seen on the video, where she is outside of an elevator door. In the last bit of surveillance footage, Prisma is seen in front of the elevator, stumbling out of view of the camera. Dan told us, quote, "She was crying behind an open trunk of a car, and all of a sudden, she disappears. I've always had this hope that she got put in witness protection, and that's why she had been crying. Maybe she was worried about losing Dominic, who was her entire life." End quote. What we need you to all understand is that while the last 2 paragraphs seemed like a mixed pot of information, it's relevant because we are talking about witnesses saw, what cameras saw before Prisma disappears.
Prisma hired a babysitter to watch over Dominic while she was at work. The normal time that Prisma would come pick her son up would be 7:30 p.m. on the dot each evening. The babysitter said that she received a call from Prisma on her lunch break, and the two talked for about an hour about how Prisma's day was going. And nothing seemed off that day, but according to some sources, the babysitter had reported Prisma missing at 9:30 that evening when she never arrived to pick up Dominic. It's been noted that this was just not like Prisma because, once again, she would just never up and leave her son and was always on time picking him up. Now, alternatively, Dan does mention that the entire situation with the babysitter seemed odd to him, saying that everyone in that scenario used burner phones and that it was actually the next day when she was reported missing because he went to school the next day in the same clothes as the day before. So we're hearing one thing being reported, but then we're being told that nobody was in a hurry to report her missing at all. Strange indeed.
Police wasted no time trying to find Prisma. This is actually a hopeful thing because what we have talked about in the beginning, this proves that people do care. They spoke with everyone they could think of, friends, families, co-workers, everyone. They left no stone unturned. They obtained statements from witnesses, CCTV footage from the E-bar, and the apartment building's parking garage, and found that very unfortunately, there were many areas of the apartments that were not covered with cameras, which made her disappearance that much more difficult to pinpoint.
There have been a lot of potential suspects named in Prisma's disappearance, most notably Arturo and Ryan. Both suspects had been cleared, however, Arturo continuing to fight for rights to his son Dominic, and Ryan, well, the police claimed that he had a solid alibi the day that he went missing. In fact, The police and the FBI searched Ryan's home and vehicle, but they found nothing substantial. Ryan said that on the last day he saw Prisma, he had a date that night, and after he left Prisma at the E-bar, he went out of town. He did, but it was only 10 miles from his apartment. Cell phone records show that his phone pinged in another town nearby while Prisma was still in Dallas. As far as Arturo, he was interrogated and ruled out as a suspect. Police also noted that Arturo has consistently cooperated with investigators and has been trying to actively help locate Prisma. Dan told us a similar sentiment, essentially saying that he didn't have good things to say about Arturo initially, but that he has grown to be a responsible man and father. Just a month after Prisma was last seen, he filed for emergency custody of Dominic, but the court ruled in favor of Prisma's grandparents. Arturo has grown a lot, according to Dan, and is now in his son's life and trying to build a strong relationship with him and the family.
When the police found Prisma's Jeep, her handgun was still inside, located underneath the seat. They also noticed that the Jeep itself was not registered in Prisma's name, but to an unknown male who had been married for 10 years, and was one of the last people that phone records showed Prisma called within 24 hours before her disappearance. We don't know much at all about who this man was or is, and whether or not he was a friend or lover of Prisma is a mystery. With all of this, Mesquite police ruled out everyone she had talked to that day as of suspects, including Ryan. Dan told us that they said he had a rock solid alibi. Prisma also never used her phone or her debit cards after that day. It's been noted that she just vanished into thin air.
Detective Barrett did say that they're not ruling out any situation, but they do suspect foul play was involved. He told Channel 8, or those of you not local to Dallas, WFAA, during an interview, quote, "It's hard to say if she could still be found alive. Sex trafficking and human trafficking were a concern, as was homicide. Evidence-wise, I can't rule anything out yet, but based on what we have, I believe it's going to be a nefarious reason. It would have been substantially out of the normal character to just disappear. We have a good read on her typical pattern of behavior, and behavior changes later that evening, which leads us to believe something happened to her. As her family has said before, she would never just leave her son. He was her world." End quote.
The fact that Detective Barrett mentioned trafficking leads us to some common theories. One being Prisma was drugged at the bar and taken by either a gang member or someone in human trafficking. 2 other women who favored Prisma have also disappeared in this area of Dallas after she did. While this seems like a wild theory, if you know Dallas, you'd know that this part of Dallas, this bar in particular, have had problems with this before. It is entirely possible that she's still alive out there somewhere, and according to Dan, even he thinks that there's a high likelihood her drink might have been spiked, but nobody caught it. Once again, he did say she could handle her drink.
Another theory is that Ryan was somehow involved. Despite the quote-unquote solid alibi, according to Detective Barrett, Ryan wasn't even home for several hours at the time she was at the garage and was gone until about midnight. Several sleuths who've been diving into this have considered if the day that Prisma and Ryan met to reconnect went wrong, as noted earlier when he left her at the bar, which caused him to get angry, resulting in a physical altercation not seen, and that it had occurred either in the parking garage or in the apartment itself. Another thing, many people, including Dan, find it odd that just a few days after the police searched the apartment, Ryan relocated without telling anyone. And while police say they've evidence to support this alibi, some say he could have just as easily left his cell phone in another location to throw them off.
Another theory assumes that while Prisma had no history of mental illness or depression, she could have unalived herself or ran away from her life and changed her identity. As far as depression, the day she was last seen at the elevator, she was acting strange in a way that was unlike her, both angry and disoriented. Even though many claim that she was just highly intoxicated, once again, we remember that Dan said that she could handle her liquor. And we are remembering that there is a small likelihood she could have been roofied. We're also considering the fact that no matter how much anyone can handle their liquor, she was still drinking quite a bit for 3 hours until the bartender cut her off and made her leave. So you are all now seeing why this case is so frustrating and confusing. So many different factors to be considered here. Personally, to me anyway, that is also reminiscent of Tamala Horsford case, where in short, people assumed she was drunk and did all of this to herself. But Tamala's husband said she can handle her drink too.
Prisma's family and friends continue to say that her son was her entire world, her heartbeat, and she would never end her life and leave him behind, and she would never just up and run away without taking him with her. There's just no way. However, Dan did mention something to us earlier regarding this theory of the very slight possibility that she could have gone into witness protection and had no choice but to leave her family, including Dominic, behind. He did tell one of our sources this, quote, "I just don't see how someone could just disappear like smoke in the wind. She walked out, vaporized, and disappeared. We don't have any clues," end quote.
As of the day of writing this, it's December 9th of 2023, or if you all prefer, the day that this episode drops, which will be around December 12th. It will be just 4 months shy of the 5th anniversary of Prisma's disappearance. She's been missing since April 17th, 2019, and the entire case has been nothing short of puzzling. Police say that this case continues to haunt them, with Detective Barrett telling one of our listed sources, quote, "Typically with a missing persons case, we're able to get an answer quickly by tracing phones or bank activity and watching surveillance footage. But in this particular case, all of that activity stops. There's no way to electronically track her past a certain point. In this day and age, you'd expect at least something, but she literally vanished without a trace," end quote.
Earlier this year in April, one source, once again WFAA, requested some status updates and were told by Mesquite Police Department that while there's no pending or active leads currently, they will continue to follow up on any possible information received and ask that if anyone has any information about this case to please contact the Mesquite Police Department. When talking to Dan, he put it like this: "It's an active case, but it's dormant. Mesquite Police Department are keeping their cards close to their chests," and Dan is quoted as saying, quote, "It can't be hot or cold. It's got to be one or the other," end quote. Dan also went on to tell us that the following, quote, "There's more to this case than what it seems. Higher profile stuff. I've believed that for 3 years now. It's something larger because it garnered immediate response from higher profile law enforcement like Texas Rangers and the FBI. One investigator said that they had a small piece to a larger puzzle. It's just odd. They don't want to release too much information because they don't want to blow something big up. The information might blow the whole case wide open. That's my personal belief anyway. I can't say for sure that's what they're doing, but that's my own personal belief," end quote.
Dan also told us that he hasn't talked to the main detective, we believe to be Detective Barrett, in a few years because he got promoted, but that he still will do interviews. He also said that another detective was really helpful and had a ton of information, but before Dan could get the information, the detective sadly passed away. He then went on to mention that the photo for the original missing persons flyer was one of Prisma in a red polo, because that was what the last photo of Prisma was taken the very day before she disappeared. But a PI had advised him to use a different one to garner more attention. For the sake of accuracy, he wants everyone to know that the photo of her in the red polo is the most current photo that they have.
As of today, Prisma, assuming she's still alive, which the family feels they have no reason to believe that she's not, would be 30 years old. As the case stands today, Prisma's family are still searching for her, and Dan is never going to give up until he gets answers. When we spoke to Dan, he was driving for his job and was so determined to talk to me about this that he even multitasked while trying to pump gas at a gas station. We mentioned this before, but he told us that he spent money out of his own pocket to secure missing persons flyers and billboards. He did also say that there's a reward for any information leading to a break in the case. The reward money came directly out of his pocket, around $2,500 to $3,000.
Prisma Denise Peralta Reyes, then 26, was last seen alive in Old East Dallas on April 17, 2019, around 5:47 p.m. She was last seen wearing a red polo shirt and blue jeans. Her height is estimated to be 5 foot 2 inches, and she weighs approximately 135 pounds. Mesquite Police Department urges anyone with information to call Mesquite Police Department at 972-285-6336. Both Dan and Police PD say they do not care how you come forward with information, saying that you can report anonymously through Crime Stoppers. But please come forward as we approach the 5th year of her being missing. You can also send messages to the Find Prisma Facebook page, will be linked in the episode notes.
In a final note from Dan Fuchs, who, by the way, was such a lovely man, he wants everyone to know that he's received a ton of comments about him being an older white man married to a Hispanic woman, and that doesn't matter. While he and Lilia are no longer married, he did want everyone making such comments to know that whether he's seen in this light or another, he doesn't care what anyone thinks about him. He still appreciates it because that means you're looking for Prisma also. His words, quote, "I don't care if people look at me. That means they're looking for Prisma," end quote. We want to close this out with that, and hopefully, Dan, if you're listening, we want you to know that you are definitely awesome, and that Allison from Coffee and Cases and Raven from the Sirens, they were all right about you. Thank you so much for speaking with us, and we are right by your side in this effort to find Prisma. We genuinely wish you the absolute best. And Prisma, if you are listening, please reach out to Dan in some way. Just let somebody know that you're okay. You're very important to a lot of people, and you are so loved.
Before we close out, real brief mention that we will be taking a short Christmas break until possibly December 26th. We don't quite know yet, but in the meantime, we will be dropping 2 episodes in our place. One from Kristen of Murder She Told about a very important case. We wanted to honor Kristen because her birthday was just a few days ago, so happy birthday, Kristen. We'll also be dropping an episode from our friend Jason of Santa May Be a Criminal podcast. Because why wouldn't we drop an episode from Santa May Be a Criminal right before Christmas? Just wouldn't make any sense anyway else.
Prisma Denise Peralta Reyes, and in many ways, Dan Fuchs, all of her family are all bees. Bees are strong, resilient, yet vulnerable. Without bees, we as a human race cannot survive and thrive in life. We also, as bees, need to work together to find the missing bees who strayed from the hive. Bees like Samantha Tapp and Prisma, to name a few. So with that, be vigilant. For when you mess with the bees,
you get the hive.
Thank you for listening to A Nefarious Nightmare. Music used in the theme was originally by Ghost Stories Incorporated, remixed by Ryan RCX Murphy. Additional background music is provided by Epidemic Sound. A Nefarious Nightmare is scripted, researched, and produced by Courtney Fenner and Amanda Cronin. I'm Lainey Hobbs, and as always, be vigilant. For when you mess with the bees, you get the hive.